and he starts off with 1 e4. What is Rapport going to play? My guess is the Sicilian. Knowing that how aggressive Rapport is, I think he would want to go for the throat. Rapport takes his time and opens the game with the Sicilian. Very interesting, because Gukesh also loves complex positions, Rapport also loves them, and it's Sicilian on the board, so everything to fight for here. Knight comes out to f3, and now Richard can go d6, knight c6, e6, g6. There are many ways to play this Sicilian opening. He goes d6, which is the main move. Gukesh has two approaches: positional move with bishop b5 or the main move with d4, and that's what he does. The open Sicilian is on the board. Pawn takes pawn, and now knight takes pawn, very likely. So we are going to watch a open Sicilian game, which could be theoretical, and generally through this move order we see the Najdorf happening. Knight c3, and the Najdorf starts with the move a6, but Richard plays his knight to c6, so the classical Sicilian is on the board, and it's the most logical move on the board, because you put your knight out, you develop it. But Gukesh goes for bishop g5. This is known as the Richter-Rauzer variation inside the classical. Bishop g5, and you want to quickly develop queen d2, long castle, and start pushing your f-pawn. That's how the game goes. Queen d2 is played by Gukesh. Meanwhile, black is playing within his territory. These moves, bishop d7, a6, e6, are very common in this system. Gukesh castles it out. He is getting ready for a big fight here. He brings his king to c1, and Richard plays his pawn to e6. Black wants to go bishop e7, later maybe castle short, maybe keep the king in the center, maybe move the queen and castle long. So a lot of flexibility in black's camp, and Gukesh goes f3. Now this is an important branching moment, because f4 is also played often, but Gukesh goes for f3 line, and his idea is that he wants to go g4 and h4. Meanwhile, Richard takes the knight, queen takes on d4, and what is the next move that he wants to play? Will he go bishop e7, just finishing his development? Yes, he does. Bishop e7 on the board. Now, generally the d6 pawn is soft, but if you try and take it this way, then there's always compensation, with bishop takes c3 or queen e7. So Gukesh here plays this little move, king b1. He puts his king to the side, and Rapport goes queen to c7. He knows that here there's no hurry to castle. His king is well placed in the center. And Gukesh now comes back to d2. Well, one of his ideas could be to remaneuver his knight to the d4 square, and b5 played. So Richard is absolutely not worried about his king or anything. He plays his pawn to b5. Gukesh goes h4. From the time situation, it does feel that both players are well prepared at this point of time. And now Richard plays his pawn to b4. The knight is attacked, but in a way the knight was not doing much on c3, so Gukesh is happy to reroute it. He plays his knight to e2. From e2, it can go to d4. It can also go to g3 to h5. So a lot of possibilities there. a5 played. So black is actually playing very quickly. He wants to play a4, a3 or a4, b3. All of these possibilities exist. Whoa, Gukesh goes for c4. And his point is, if you go here and take it, I have e5, fantastic move, and if you take here, then eventually your bishop is hanging. So that's the reason why you can't take the pawn. e5 played here by Rapport, trying to stop white's e5 ideas, but then he does weaken the d5 square, and Gukesh's knight goes to g3. He's looking at this square, but also looking to take and then put his knight here. Notice that if you take on f6 at any point, like here now, Rapport will take with the bishop, not with the pawn. And if you try to win this pawn, then this is excellent compensation here for black. Bishop e7, bishop c5, king e7. So Gukesh not really tempted by taking the pawn. He comes back, bishop e3, and he is ready to sort of start his knight's journey, maybe to f5, but maybe to some other square. He goes h5 now, Richard. He wants to maybe keep the knight away from this square, or he wants to stop white from pushing his pawn to h5. So in general, a useful move to play. And now Gukesh finishes his development. He plays bishop e2. So Gukesh's idea is simple. He will move his bishop away, take his knight to f1 to e3, and then look at the d5 square. I understand that this is a very long maneuver because the knight has come from c3 to e2 to g3 to f1 to e3 only to go back here, but that is the most important square in the position, and that's what Gukesh is going for. He goes knight f1, and he is going for this plan with maybe bishop g5, maybe knight e3. So Richard now plays his bishop to e6. He is attacking the c4 pawn, but actually this pawn is not so easy to take because there will be a pin here with rook c1. So for the time being, Gukesh plays his bishop to f2. A small surprise for me because I thought he would go bishop g5 and knight e3, knight d5, but bishop f2 makes a lot of sense. He just wants to keep his bishop. Rapport goes queen b7. Actually, black is lacking active plans here, because if you push your pawns, I'm simply going to go to b3 a3 and to a3 b3. So there's no way to open up the position. Meanwhile, the knight is coming in. There are ideas of g4. So a very, very pleasant position for white. Rapport castles. Now this is actually playing with fire, because if Gukesh gets a successful g4, Rapport is in big trouble. But for the time being, Gukesh simply improves his position. Very interesting move, bishop d3, because one could imagine that Gukesh would jump in with his knight to the center of the board, which was also a nice move. But he goes bishop d3, and he is angling with his bishop in this direction. Wow, rook comes in, attacking the c4 pawn, also improving the position of the rook. I think it's time to jump in with your knight. That's exactly what Gukesh does. The knight jumps into d5. It has to go. And Rapport takes it with his bishop. Now you have both the options. You can take here with the pawn, when maybe black would go bishop d8, bishop b6, trying to trade his bad bishop. But Gukesh goes ed, opening up the bishop and wanting to go all out on the attack with g4. This is excellent, exciting chess. Bishop f8 played by Rapport. Now is it time to just go for the attack with g4? Because if you play it, takes, I can take, and if you try to win a pawn here, I simply blow away your king side. This is what could happen, and this is exactly what Gukesh has done. He's played g4. Rapport tries to create play on the queen side with b3, but I think Gukesh can simply keep it closed with a3. The game is getting very sharp, and Gukesh seems to have the upper hand against Richter-Rauzer. Gukesh thinks for a bit, because he could go on and attack there, but he first decides to defend his position, plays his pawn up to a3. What's next now for Rapport? Where does his play come from? He goes e4. This is what top players do. When they are pushed, they try to create counterplay, but there's an excellent move for Gukesh to put his bishop in the center of the board, and he finds it. Bishop d4. What an excellent move here. He is now attacking this knight, because this is now trouble for Rapport. He takes the pawn. He takes the bishop with his pawn, and now the knight is going to fall. The main problem here for black is that his king side is falling apart. Gh5 is a big threat, and if you take here, h5 just opens this mating net. So what is Rapport going to do? How is he going to find play? He goes queen a6. He plays it, but now can Gukesh just take the pawn on h5? That would be very strong. Also, Gukesh has 13 minutes on the clock. Rapport has 16 minutes. Gukesh now takes it. He takes the pawn, and clearly Richard has to be careful. One thing is that you can take this pawn. Of course, you don't want to take this. That just leads to a mate after queen g5. So he goes queen takes c4, and he's threatening this check. Now, a very strong move is king a1. Because if you come here, I can go queen e3. But Gukesh makes a bad move. He takes the pawn on d3. And after this, the position is just equal. The thing is, you don't want to trade the queens here, It was very important for Gukesh to find this move king a1, so that if queen c2 there is queen e3, and if queen takes d5 he can continue the attack with edge g6. But once he took here, now check, king a1, this means that the queens will be traded and the worst seems to be over for Richard. He takes on d3, rook takes d3 and now pushes his pawn to a4. Notice that even though black is a pawn down, these pawns are just amazing. They are creating a back rank mating net against the white king, and it's so difficult to get out of it, and that means that Gukesh cannot really win here. He cannot, actually he has to be a little careful about these back rank issues. Like Rapport goes rook c4, he's attacking the h4 pawn, he's also coming in with his rook trying to launch a mating net on the back rank. Bishop comes back to c3 for Gukesh, and yeah, makes sense, because otherwise there could have been back rank problems. Rapport takes the pawn, pawn takes pawn here, and now f takes g6. You can see that white is still a pawn up, but it's nothing special because that extra pawn is not so relevant here because of the back rank problems that white has. So here rook takes g6, king comes to h7, and now I have to be careful for the back rank problem, so maybe bringing the rook back to g1 is the best move. Yes, that's what he does. And now I think Rapport can play his rook to e8 to just come in to e1, and that could be his idea here. No, he goes bishop h6. Rapport is a world-class GM, and he absolutely understands here that the worst is over. Gukesh does take the open file here and tries to maybe create some kind of play with his rook, but Rapport puts his rook to f8, and he is putting pressure on the f3 pawn. Rook comes in to e7 with a check, and now the king can simply move away. Maybe to g8. Yeah, the g8 square looks good. You can also go up to g6. But yeah, king g8 played, and now there is a threat of again a back rank problem, and so Gukesh needs to actually come back with one of his rooks. Which one is it going to be? He goes rook e1 back, and there's no real way to make progress. Black has a very strong position there. I think Gukesh already seems to have offered a draw, and Rapport accepts it.